Can't see if Greta, Jean, and Myrna can hear. So I'm just looking at the bottom there, and under attendees, I don't see any indication they can hear, but okay. So as long as you can hear, okay. What I'll do is say hi. I'm in Calgary, and I've been asked to say something about our church and the leadership that we've experienced in the last 6.5 years, which is my time here. If you keep going back, sorry, yeah, we're going to look at a variety of things here. We're going to talk about intentional leading, a book called Good the Great, about the importance of the person, not necessarily a position, how we market ourselves to the world, and not so much to ourselves, but to the people, or the people in the pews, but to the wider community. And I'm going to say something about values. So those are just words that you have there that sort of guide you. If I were to think about this conversation, I'm coming here recognizing that we're all leaders in some way, and that's part of our work in the church. So I want to begin by saying that leadership's really hard work. And I'm wondering if you would help me by if you have a question, just as we start, a question that you're wrestling with in your particular congregation or leadership position. So just take a second. If you have a question, I just want to make sure that I'm not just talking, but that I try to address something you're thinking about. Do you have a question, perhaps, as you think about leadership? Or do you want me just to keep going? Okay, I don't see anything coming up, so I'm just going to go ahead. I see Alan Saunders is there. Alan, can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm just going to go because it's kind of awkward. Oh. Great. Okay, I'll just go ahead. Okay, so I just want to suggest that it's hard work being in the church. It can be depressing, discouraging, and frustrating, absolutely. But my experience is that it can also be very invigorating and exciting. I think that one of the things we need to be thinking about as leaders is that is that we are not about ourselves. But we are about what we envision God to be and who God is in our particular context. And so our role as a leader is to manage and shift people in the direction of the sacred, I would say. Or in the particular text this coming week, Jesus talks about being the gate or a way. And I think that's part of our thinking about how are we being passionate about what we've experienced or we want others to experience about the sacred. With regards to my particular experience, I worked in a 3-point charge for 4 years. I was there for 4 years. I was the longest person they had in 60 years, so it was a place of change. I then moved to a large suburban church that had 2 services and 300 kids and 400 people on a Sunday. I then left that church after 10 years and went and worked at the United Way of Calgary and area. That was a very scary and risky thing, but it was one of the best things I've done as far as leadership, to get out of a church and see how other organizations lead in their particular context. What I discovered is they do a very good job. And in fact, I sort of thought to myself, boy, we don't really even need churches. They're doing so well at getting across a lot of great and important values and opportunities within the city. At the same time, I was doing a thesis at Chicago Theological Seminary in preaching, and it was called Speaking Faith in Public Space. And so I was trying to think about in the thesis about how we speak in a church and how that's quite easy, how we have in words, how we have a common language. But what do you do when you're speaking about faith in a wider, broader context? And so it became about how do you speak in public space. That is, how do you speak about what's important when you're not in a church? And that thinking grounds a lot of how I understand leadership. Because it's one thing to talk in a church, it's another to be able to be engaging with people beyond our doors, which is a big part of what I want to speak about today. When I was at United Way, I came across a book called The World We Want by Mark Kingwell. Mark Kingwell is a philosophy professor. He was looking at what people wanted, and what he thought people wanted was happiness. What he discovered is that people bought a lot of stuff, but the stuff wasn't making them happy. What he realized was that people really wanted not so much happiness, but what we want is meaning. And maybe if you can go to the next slide. The meaning, nope, sorry, the one by Kingwell. Nope. There you go.
You mean this one?
That's the one.
You mean this one?
So what he discovered, this is really important to get, I think. Oh, you went backwards. There you go. What he says about meaning is this, that it's about, we experience meaning when we are engaged in creative leisure. That is, we're doing something, whether if you're out near the ocean, whether it's being on the water or hiking or yoga or biking or artistic work, dance, music, things like that. Creative leisure. When we have a connection to family and friends. So some kind of, it doesn't mean biological, but it could be spirit friends or family. A connection to others. The third is commitment to common social projects. That is, opportunities to volunteer, to serve, to do something meaningful with your time. And the fourth thing he says is that meaning comes when we offer time to reflect. And what I would say here is that if you look at meaning, that's one way of talking about it in a public space. We might talk about it in a church with the word faith. And that's the bridge to the culture, which I want to talk about next week. But the thing when I think about leadership and I think about our opportunity is the church should be about helping people experience meaning. At its core level, we are about experiencing meaning and connecting to the sacred. So in some sense, the church could think about how well do we do at those four things, or encouraging those four aspects of meaning, or generally an overarching umbrella. Are we really about meaning? So much of what I find is done in the church isn't about meaning at all. It's just about doing stuff. I might even say stupid stuff. Stuff that doesn't matter, stuff that's not important, or stuff that's had its day. So this kind of thinking came to me when I was at United Way, because I realized that the churches can be about meaning. And when we are about meaning in all that we try to do in the church, people really want to come. They want to connect. They want to experience it. So I think as leaders, what we are trying to do is imagine and wonder about a very intentional conversation with ourselves about how we are going to create and connect with meaning. That's really an important thing to get. As I entered this church, it began with a small number, about 38. People still say there were more in the choir than the congregation, to now a place that's, we have 2 services on Sunday, and we're proud. About 300 people on a Sunday. So it's had a dramatic shift in a short amount of time. The next piece I want to think about is realizing in the last 24 years I've been in ministry, the expectations people have of the minister has shifted. And there's a very good book called The Inventive Church, Inventive Age by Doug Pagitt, and I won't bother going into it, but he does do a shift in how the role of the leader has changed through time. For example, he talks about being a leader in a rural area where you were probably the most educated person in the community, to the role in the inventive age where you're facilitating all kinds of thoughtful leadership to be involved in the actual organization of the church. But when I came to this particular church, and I had looked at a couple other churches when I was at United Way. It was interesting to go to churches and go through the call process, because you soon discover what the churches are about and what you're about. There were some churches that wanted me to come and take care of them, literally. And other churches, when I offered exciting potential, they just kind of said, no, we don't want to see you around here, and they never really called me back. And that was in an area, as an example, that was very diverse in culture. It could have really built bridges to the culture, but chose not to, still isn't, and it's probably going to close. But when I came to this particular church, they were do or die. They were really at a place where I was going to be the last minister if things didn't work out. Fortunately, I had a good colleague, Karen Holmes, ahead of me, who got rid of lots of people, and I'll say more of that, and also kept some really great people. So I came to a fertile ground. But what was really important in the conversation was, and you should write this down, I think, it's they asked me to lead. They called me here to lead. And it's really important if you are in leadership somewhere to ask, what are you called to do where you are? And I don't mean called to worship pastoral care. I mean, are you called to lead? And churches that allow the leader to lead can really go somewhere. So it was very clear they called me to lead. The second thing they called me to was to connect to the neighborhood. When you call someone to lead and to connect to the neighborhood, and you can remind them as a leader, that's what you're doing and why I'm doing it, and that's why you called me here, it can really take off, because there was lots of permission given to connect with the neighborhood, with the businesses, the stores, the people in the community. And it was also gave me a trump card in some ways to be able to say, look, you asked me here to lead, and this is what I'm trying to do. So if you're in your church, you may want a conversation with some folks and say, well, why do you think I'm here? Or what are you calling me to? It's really important that we have a clear sense of what we're called to in our particular church. It's important to consider what that calling was and is, and whether it needs to be revisited. So that's really important in the call. When we get to churches, if you can go to the next slide on curious, committed, and comfortable. This one here. It's really important to think about, and you could think about this in a variety of contexts, but in the church, about who our market might be, or who our attention might be, or who the congregation is called to be as a faithful journeying group. A lot of churches have, and I had a small group of what you might call committed people in the center. Committed people are those who come, some will come no matter what. Even if it's rotten, they'll come. Some will be committed financially or with their time to ensure the church happens. The next circle are those who you might say are comfortable with what's going on. It's a place to come. It's a community. They feel like they know who's who and what's what and how the place works. The outer circle is what I would call curious. And the curious folks, for me, are those who are our biggest market as a church, the United Church in particular. If you think back to the work that was done about the United Church, those are seekers. Those are people who are curious. Those who call the United Church their church, even though they don't go. When I look at these three circles, I think about this often, because our focus at Hillhurst is for sure on the curious. That is, we do everything we try to do. We try to market to those who are somewhere else. I don't mean other churches necessarily, but they're not necessarily here. So as an example, when I was leading a course a couple of weeks ago, I asked people who they were. I mean, I was in the course, I didn't know everybody in the room. About a third were United Church, a third were other denominations, so Catholic, Evangelical, Presbyterian, and a third were roughly no church. That is, they have no church memory, didn't grow up in a church. Our community of faith really takes that seriously, that we're not a club, there's no secret handshakes, we're not about making people United Church. Some people won't like that I say that, but that's really true. We're fairly congregational in that sense in this neighborhood. We're trying to reach out to the people that are walking by, the people that live in this neighborhood, and we do that, and I'll say more about this in a few minutes. Our website is really a draw. I see lots of people on Sundays, and I'll say, how'd you find us? They'll say, we saw your website, we were searching for a church, we listened to some sermons, we thought we'd check it out. A lot of people, our website is crucial to leading. Our worship tells the general public who are curious who we are and what we're about. And so this circle is really a helpful piece for me to think about where our church lies. Of course, we want the committed people and the comfortable and the curious. But if we don't pay attention to the curious out there, I think we're really missing something. So how we speak about who we are in the general public, what's written about us in the paper, what opportunities we take to make ourselves available really matters. Again, of course, it's obvious you can know Jesus spent a lot of time with the committed, the comfortable, and the curious. I would argue probably mostly the curious. Those who were pushed out, lots who were on the side, those who didn't think they were valuable. And that's really our market as churches, I think, or ones that want to lead in the future. As an example, we just had a course here called Religious Refugees. And that was designated to people who've been hurt by the church or another tradition. We had 15 to 20 people came. I was not leading it, so it was my colleague who was leading it. But what she said were people who were from evangelical churches who couldn't take the theology, or who were gay and who were pushed out, or people who were in other mainline churches for whom the theology just didn't fit anymore. Evangelicals will tell me they're the ones that lead the evangelical church, or in our culture, and are passionate people looking for a spiritual connection. And that curious piece is really an important thing to think about your particular church. How open are we? How eager are we to seem to be and to be interested in the curious? I'm just going to stop there because I'm just rambling away here. Anybody say anything about that?
I hesitate to speak. I'm aware of my audio difficulties here, but I don't see any questions. Coming in. So I really resonate with your comment about Jesus being among the curious.
Did somebody just say, tell me you're alive out there?
Silent group thing. Silent group thing.
Okay.
Just soaking it in.
Okay, so that's a really important piece as I think about how this place shifted, was to pay attention to those who are at various levels of connection to the church. One of the things that I would want to say about how we get resources, or how we pay attention to this, is that I got a lot of my leadership training, in quotation marks, outside the church. So wherever you are, there's got to be organizations that are doing leadership work. Not that the church is bad or doesn't provide it, but there are lots of opportunities beyond the church that help us connect to culture, which I'm going to talk about next week, but also that provide a different kind of leadership. So I was involved in a program called Leadership Calgary. It was for 1 year. It was about 20 young leaders. This was 10 years ago when I was really young. We're learning about what it means to be a pioneering leadership. I've also taken part in a project called Executive Directions, which is young, or not young, particularly young, but executive directors. And I would say, as a minister in a church or a leader, you're an executive director of an organization. And that opportunity once a month to read a book on leadership and engage with others on what it means and how it is lived out really matters. So I also found things like the Alban Institute, the Festival of Homiletics, other courses I saw on suicide prevention or conflict resolution were the things that expanded my thinking as I tried to be in touch with and listen to the community in which I was living. I'm just going to read Greta's comment. Okay. Absolutely. I think the curious is, I'll say this, a lot of churches commit suicide, or I should say complete. That is, they make choices that don't mean that we're choosing life. We're choosing death. Some churches, I suppose, should close. Lots of opportunities in churches are missed. And I think that they make bad decisions, and that's why they end up closing. Again, you could probably shoot holes in everything I'm saying, but I'm just going to say I've experienced that. I've even experienced that in Calgary, when a great church in a great neighborhood had very few people. It was ready to start over. The presbytery wanted to close it, went ahead and closed it. They sold it to the Christian Reformed Church, who moved in, did church differently, and is very successful with about 150 on a Sunday. When I say differently, what do I mean? They were in their neighborhood, and they meet 3 out of 4 Sundays. The 4th Sunday, they're all committed to community engagement, whether it's cleaning up a riverbed or visiting in nursing homes, or being very strategic about how they are out living and walking the talk. So I'm just saying that I think being really clear about, is hope really gone, or do we need to do something different? And that the something different is what I see as a great opportunity for us. So moving on, one of the books that was very helpful to me, I'm just going to read, Alan. Yeah, I'm going to get there, Alan. Okay, a good book as part of my executive directions was a book called Good to Great. It's worth getting. It's by Jim Collins. The theory is this, that there's a lot, it's about business. A lot of businesses are good, but few are great. Think about the church. There's a lot of good churches, but few are great. How do you make a church great? He talks about what's called level 5 leadership. It is the capability of a person or a leader to have both personal humility and professional will. Those go together. Personal humility, which I think we understand what that is. We're humble and grounded, which is what humility means, hummus. And professional will, you've got a vision for where you want to go. I would say Jesus was a level 5 leader. He had incredible humility, but he also had a vision of the kingdom of God. Or I think about it with people, I say, it's like in your car you have low beam and high beam. Jesus had low beam and also high beam. He was engaged in the community. He saw what was going on, but he had a vision for the way things could be. That level 5 leadership is what I'm talking about, and Good to Great talks about this. The most important thing the book says is this, and this is hard in a church, but nonetheless, he says it's a bus. You got to get the right people on the bus and the right people off. So if you think of your church, you have to get the right people on in leadership and the right people off. I think about this often. So many churches go wrong, in quotation marks, when we have the wrong people leading, or wrong people driving, or people are just fooling around the bus. I got a little baby at home right now, and we're singing "Wheels in the Bus Go Round and Round," and I think about this all the time. But the right people on, right people off is the key to this particular book. That organizations were great, had the right people leading. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about the right lay leaders leading the organization, moving it forward. So to Alan's question, I think, is what do you do when you have the wrong people leading? Well, you have to move them off. In some cases, you have to fire them. I've only had to do that 3 or 4 times in the ministry here. It's hard to do with lay people in particular, to help them see that they're not the right person leading at the right time. I'm going to get to how do you do this without hurting feelings. I'll give you 2 examples. One was a woman in a choir who was quite negative and critical, and we sort of said, you had a conversation, you're being quite negative and critical about where we're headed. We really need you to stop that, or we're going to have to ask you not to sing in the choir. And she took that as a way out, and she did. Similarly, sadly this year, a guy who'd been in our church probably 15 years had a repeated pattern of being abusive. That is, he was the chair of the board at one point, not anymore. Very strong, very critical of others, not to myself as a leader, thankfully, but he had an edge to him. He also was doing a little bit inappropriate as a treasurer. He was talking to other people about some confidential matters. We had to meet with him and the M&P and the chair of the board and ask him to resign. In both cases, it's not easy, and you probably do hurt feelings, Greta, but the consequences also of having people who are in leadership speaking about the organization in ways that's not healthy. I received a letter about, we're talking about, the letter said something to the effect, we're talking about bullying in our culture. How come the church allows bullying, like the kind of bullying we're seeing? And so we were called to act upon it. And if you're going to do it strategically, you have to make sure the right people know the information. And so that's ensuring that your M&P are active, that they understand the vision of why you're doing what you're doing, where you're going, and that inappropriate behavior is just not allowed. I'll get to that in a few minutes. But this is a really key point around the right people in the Russ. Getting the right people in the right spot, the right people doing the right function, and those who are not able, you're not kicking them out of the church, you're kicking them out of leadership, which is different. In some cases, the people who you've asked to move move over, they don't necessarily lead. I also think that hurt feelings, if the ethic of the organization is not being lived out, then you might want to encourage people that they're in the wrong place. It sounds brutal. I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. Trust me, it's not my strength. But I also know that a lot of organizations are held back by having the wrong people in the wrong seat. Any question on that? I did do a sermon on this. It's on our website a couple of years ago. People really get it when it's grounded in honoring people where they're at, making sure the right people are in the right spots. It is work. I'm just waiting. David's typing something here. Yeah, hurting one's feelings is better than allowing the church hurt the church as a whole. I absolutely believe that. I had people who were and when they left the board 4 or 5 years ago, I said, why? And they said, I'm not going to be around that kind of behavior. We know when behavior is inappropriate and when people are saying things they shouldn't, and the church should raise the bar. The church should not lower the bar and dumb it down. The church should raise the bar on the kind of behavior we expect, the kind of leadership we admire, the kind of vision that we want to hold on to. So I totally agree with that. I want to move on because I've got lots I want to say. A really key thing I say when I'm talking to other churches is asking the question, do you know the values of the community you're living in? When I got to this church, I recognized that they were just a sort of a gathering of people who were doing their stuff, often inappropriate, didn't quite know what they were doing. It was an opportunity after a year to engage in putting together what we would call a handbook. That is the opportunity to say, how are we organized, who does what people are on the bus and in what particular positions. It gave an opportunity to move some people out nicely. And we really did that well. We would just say, here's what we're doing. I think this falls under another title within our organization. Thanks very much, and move over. So you can do it strategically by having a handbook that has people in position. So as an example, we had at that point a UCW and a catering committee. We didn't at that point need either one, and they were doing smaller work on the board, so we moved them over under what we called community care. And so their work was honored still, but not represented on the board. So what I would want to say that is key is that churches got to know their values, what they're doing. And so we engage in a process of discovering our values. Why are we here? What are we doing? What do we value? We took 8 months to do that. On our website, there's a link there to the values named. My point is the process of gathering, having a consultant work with you for 6 to 8 months, engaging in conversation with other people about why we're here and what we value, and narrowing it down in our particular community. Radical hospitality, spirituality, and social justice are the values. Hospitality, spirituality, social justice. I say them every Sunday morning when I welcome people here. The banner out front of the church says, whoever you are, wherever you're at, you're welcome. And that hospitality and the values are named every week. I'll say 80% of our church knows our values, and they're lived out. Those values came up after about 8 months of work together as a community of really naming what that means and what it looks like. We did things like talk to the business community who don't come here, to the stores in the neighborhood. We went and we overheard conversations in coffee shops and talked about what are people talking about, how does that fit with who we are and what we want to try to connect to. That whole process of naming your values is really key, because they become what drives everything you do. So churches that don't have, I'll say, 3 values in a one-line mission statement are those that are kind of floundering, perhaps going in different directions all the time. Those 3 values help us as a church be focused on what we're doing and why we're doing, and how it connects back to what I said at the very beginning about meaning. How are we doing that? The board structure is really important. What I discovered when it came to the organization here was getting the right people on the bus of the board, the right people off, and giving them important things to do. That is, I wanted the board to be not something they regretted going to or hated going to or resisted, something they looked forward to, they wanted to be part of, and they saw it as a leadership opportunity. So often we don't ask our leaders to lead. We don't give them interesting or inspiring things to do. One of the things that helped us was creating what I call an executive. The executive take care of some of the small stupid stuff or fiduciary kinds of things we don't necessarily want to spend our time doing. And so at a board meeting, the executive is already met, usually for an hour before the board meeting the week before, to take care of some of the details we don't want the whole board to have to wrestle with. So it could be silly things like, the price of a turkey supper ticket. We don't do that, but as an example, instead of 12 people sitting around for an hour on a Wednesday night talking about it, a lot of the details of the stuff that make the organization run are already taken off the plate. So that when the board comes together, they're doing what I would call important stuff. I think you've got a slide here on this strategic, fiduciary, generative. It's on leadership. There you go. Got back one. Back one. There you go. It's a book called Their Governance as Leadership. What this book was, it came to me through my other work in leadership, was so often we have board meetings that we're not really about the values of the organization. We're not really engaging in the kind of conversation about where we're going. And so governance as leadership splits what you talk about in meetings in three particular areas. What I might call fiduciary work. That's stuff you got to do. It might be about the budget. It might be about finances. It might be about some of the not that interesting essentials. The next part of the triangle, if this was a triangle, the next side would be what you might call strategic work. What are the shorter term goals or the shorter term things we're doing in the coming year that make us on target, make sure that we're doing the work that we said we were going to do in the particular year. And then what they talk about is space for generative ideas and possibilities. So in our board meetings, we try really hard to stick to this, where we would not spend more than 5 or 10 minutes on finances, and the rest of the work would be strategic work and generative work. What that means is that you're engaging people who are around the table in some bigger picture thinking. About what's going on in the church this year. Where do we see ourselves being placed in the future? I think churches that think about their future often are ones that really have exciting possibilities. So they're talking about where we're going to be, what's our plan, what's our future. If you look on the website, we called this sort of, our work is looking at what we might call provocative proposals. So when we did our values, we looked at what we want to be in 2014. This was 3 years ago, so 5 years out what we looked at. And we revisit that generative thinking in our board meetings. So who are we, what are we doing, where do we want to see ourselves, what possibilities are there in the culture, which I'll talk about next week. But my point is on the board meetings is that we want them to be, these are leaders in your church, we want them to feel good about where they are. We start our meeting at 6 o'clock. We have dinner together every meeting. I teach in some kind of educational framework for 45 minutes on a particular topic or something I've read or something of interest to the particular group. And then we have our meeting. We don't go through all that we've done. All of our reports are submitted, and we just go around the table in the strategic work about what's coming up in the short term we want help from each other or as part of our work. And then we try to spend a good chunk of time on the bigger picture generative thinking. Our meeting usually is over by 8 or 8:30, no later, and often people will go out for a beer or coffee after, and I'd say at least half to 3/4, sometimes all the board participate. My point is that they see the board as a way to connect, they're doing good thinking, and they like being together, and I think food really matters. We eat a lot here, and the time to know each other and work together is something people really like and admire. So the board leading in your church really matters. I have some people on the board who have obvious regular positions like worship chair and spiritual nurture and things like that, but there are also people on there who I just said, I want you on the board. And they bring strategic thinking. They're on as members at large. And they're there because I know they've got a connection to the community that we really need to hear from. And it's really important that we pay attention to that. So that's not just people who've got a job, but people who might have some ideas. Last thing I'll say about the board, I'll look at this in a moment, is that we, as part of the board meeting, every meeting we ask somebody to listen to the meeting conversation and report back at the end how we were attentive to our values of radical hospitality, spirituality, and social justice in the meeting. So we report back at the end of the meeting, reflect back, yes, when we talked about this particular issue, we were talking about hospitality. When we talked about this, it was social justice. So we try to make sure that we are keeping our values and what we're doing driving everything we're doing. Okay, unfortunately, I'm just reading. Unfortunately, a small world. In small rural areas, your focus is going to be a little bit different about how do we encourage and make church part of all of the running and running to the rink, the school, the hall, etc., etc. I think it's hard. It may require fewer leaders. I think creating the board in a way that is about something that feeds them as opposed to something else they have to do. So you might want to have a conversation with the board as how do we make sure that we're meeting as a board and it's not one more thing you have to do, in quotation marks, what you have, but something you really want to do. I think we do waste a lot of time with people because they feel they've got to do something. People, when they're doing something they really want to do, make the effort and the time to be there. So you might want to engage Myrna or Bob in a conversation with the board. Okay, what do we really need to have done? What's essential? What do we need to drop? What do we need to stop doing and start doing? It is a huge challenge. So the format that I'm talking about, you can play with a little bit. The footnote on this one is if you go to what's called center point, if you Google center point and wrote in governance as leadership, you'll get a footnote there on how this works in a business community. But my answer to that would be, you can do this in any organization, small or large. So many churches spend all their time on fiduciary work in their boards that they don't ever get to strategic or generative work. It's not about building a big church, it's about doing meaningful work. So how do we, with our boards, how can this be meaningful for you? How can we have a board that you really want to come to? How can you ensure that you really want to be part of? Because as a leader, I hated having people think that they were coming to a lousy board meeting. And for sure, that's the case when I first got to this church. I dreaded it. So I had to shift how they did their work so people really like coming to the board. So I think that's really important. Creating the board as a community that wants to come together, that's about the values of the church, that really is trying to live what people have said really matters. Churches that don't have their values, I think sometimes are trying to do too much or do something that could be done somewhere else. I think in smaller rural communities, the question I would say in those communities is what's the ground truth? That is, we say we're friendly, but are we really? I think that's so important that we have communities that they are what they say. If you say that you're friendly, you better be friendly. If you say that you're open, you better be open. People can sniff that out and they'll run the other direction if we don't have integrity in who we say we are. Similarly, I love it when people challenge me and they'll say something like, I thought we have hospitality. I didn't experience that last week when I had that. And so it's really important when something happens that people feel free to challenge us to ensure we're living the values. They're not just something you throw up on the wall or you do the exercise and don't ever visit again. They're part of everything you want, everything you say you are. I just want to read these. I could talk lots about finance. Interestingly, in this church, Greta, the budget's increased. This past February, we increased our budget by $91,000. This is not a particularly rich church, but the process of saying this is where we want to go and this is what we need, this is what it's going to cost. There was 150 people at the congregational meeting, and there was 100% buy-in. We're starting to raise the money specifically over and above what people committed this year, and we're at about $40,000, almost the financial piece later. But I do think that when you make the case about what you want to do and why you want to do it, it's really important. People generally rally up. And Myrna and Bob, focus on survival. I think it is on survival. I think I would want to encourage it's how do we not just survive, but how do we thrive? And that's not a judgment, but I do think a lot of churches just survive, and they shouldn't. Some have to just survive, but I do think that that we want to raise the bar and say we're not just about surviving, we want to thrive. And how we use our space is another whole conversation. What I do want to say is that the board and the leadership with about meaning and about the values that you have named really drive everything you do. And when people know who they are and what they want, we will make sure that we're about meaning. I'll just comment quickly on staff. The staff when I got here was about 70 hours a week total. I don't mean me, I'm talking myself. 20 hours as secretary, 10 hours organist, 10 hours janitor, about 70 hours. And now our staff has increased to those who are paid, that is including everybody from somebody who does a couple hours a week in the nursery to myself, is 18 people. And there's a variety of people on staff, which I think is key to helping churches grow, is that we don't always just need another minister. We might need another person with a different expertise. So Joanne, who was with me last week, is a lawyer by training, but is a former evangelical. She's smart and wise and connected, and she really has a 20-hour-a-week job here in worship animation. She's very good at using her talents to help worship be a better, more meaningful experience. Similarly, we have somebody in communications 20 hours a week. She is purely a communications person, but the work she does with our website, with our bulletins, and anything we print and put out is exceptional. She brings, as an outsider, a lot of great thinking to our council, to our staff meetings and to the life and work of the church. She did such a great job, but she's 30 years old. After 1 year, she wants to change. She's going in 20 hours into our affirming ministry at our church. She'll still be on staff. We just hired somebody this past week to replace her at 20 hours a week in communication. Having people who communicate who you are and lead that communication to the curious people in the world really matters. A lot of church communication is just that, church communication. And we have to really get out of the box and think, how does this speak? How is it heard in the culture? What does it say about who we are and the values we live? And so that staff position in communications is really important. I don't know that there's another church in Calgary that has a communication staff person, but I would say that her leadership in communications is essential to who we are as a church. If you go to our website, you can see some of the crazy stuff she does. It's brilliant. And she gets our name out in the city in various communities really well. Churches should probably have somebody on staff. If they have, I know in small rural areas this may not be making sense, but communications is essential in an urban center for sure. So I want to say something about this, that when you're creating a staff together, a lot of people, you don't need a lot of full-time people. A lot of people are quite part-time and with varied tasks. When I got to this church, I said to them, we're not going to have any kids here, so let's just get over it. And I was completely wrong. When a couple of kids showed up, we hired somebody 10 hours a week, and then we bumped it up, and now we have 2 with a total of 30 hours a week. Partly because I think in churches you got to pay for something you want to have happen before You don't have 10 kids sitting there with no program. You budget for what you want to see happen. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. We've got to put some money to the places and programs we want to see happen. A lot of the staff organization, I think, is about getting the right person. Maybe not the right, maybe not what you think. So as an example, the person we're just hiring in communications has high school education. Her resume is brilliant, and she bypassed several people in the interview process because of the kinds of things she said about who she is and what she wants to see us communicate to the world. And so we have to have a really diverse kind of staff and openness to the kinds of people who will spark the right kind of energy amongst the staff. One of the things that I come close to what I want to end here is to say, one of the things I noticed in this church is I've never heard this phrase, "We always do it this way." That phrase is a church killer, I think. I think churches are really good at doing the same thing over again, even when they don't work. I've never heard, and I'll knock on wood here, I've never heard anybody say, "We've always done it this way." I think that's really helpful because it's looking forward. It's taking seriously Jesus' phrase, no one who puts their hand to the plow and looks backwards is fit for the kingdom. I think there's some real truth to that. The church is called to lead and engage and be relevant to the community around us, whatever that community is, whether it's rural or suburban. When I have been doing my journey and I've sort of come to a void or a bump or an uncertainty, I've had what's called listening circles. I get 4 or 5 people who I respect their opinion, who are diverse in the community, and I get together with them and I invite them to have another presider leads a conversation where I just listen to what they have to say about who we are and where we're going, what my role is. You might want to, wherever you are, engage in that kind of meaningful conversation with people. I want to talk about leadership, and I want to talk about meaning. And engaged listening to the people around you as they might guide or encourage you in a certain direction, to be someone who may go in a different direction. I guess I would want to ask this question for you. In leadership, it's really important that you believe what you're doing. And I run into some colleagues who don't really particularly have that sense of that they really believe what they're doing. If I ask the question, would you go to your church? Many would say no. And I would say, so what do we have to do so that you would actually choose to go to the church you're working in? And I think the final centered question is, what's the truth about where you are and what's the ground truth? If they're the same, that's great. If they're not, it's often a problem. Okay, I just want to back up on what you've said here.
Finding it an interesting reflection that so many of our participants may have experience in a rural community, but what it would look like to apply your principles in this context.
I really think it's in the churches. 100% attendance in one of the churches I had was 12 people. Okay, so I'm not talking about numbers. I'm talking about we're living in a time where people want to be doing something that matters, whether they're experiencing the sacred in one form or another, whether it's through worship or through a program. So it's not about numbers. It's about ensuring that we're about meaningful stuff. And I have experienced lots of churches where it doesn't seem to be meaningful at all. So I'm just letting David finish his typing. Okay, so what's sort of written there is, regardless of size, I think that the churches that have a clear sense of what they value and what their mission, in quotation, is, or vision is, and then if they are about meaning, people come. And it's not about creating a mega church. It's about having people experience the sacred where they are. And I think that energy keeps you from getting depressed. It keeps you from feeling like you're onto something. It keeps you feeling like you're serving the community you're in. And all of those things are really important because they keep us feeling healthy and doing really important things. What do you mean you call your work ministry of presence? Living our faith, yeah. I'll just wait till you finish this. I think people are really anxious and hungry to experience the sacred. And again, it's not about numbers, but it's the saying when we put worship together, how are we inviting people to experience the sacred when we come? It's not that we control God, that's not what I'm saying, but we create opportunities where they might be opened, cracked open, experience God, whether it's in a song or whether it's in the word spoken or the silence they created. What kind of space are we creating for the sacred? Did I say do? I don't remember what I said. Oh, okay. So I guess what when I think about leadership is looking in the mirror at myself, saying who am I and what are the gifts that I have? How might I help another person lead and find their gifts? When we have vacancies on our board, we leave them open sometimes for 6 or 8 months until we have the right person. We don't just say, oh, I saw you with a calculator, you must be a finance person, do you want to be the treasurer? We make sure that we have the right people doing the right things on the bus so that people are contributing valuably with their time and their talent and their treasure. I think that we're honoring who they are. I sense in this particular community a strong sense that the Spirit is joyfully bringing people to us. And when they come, we try to receive them with hospitality and try to get them connected. Next year, in the strategic work of our church, is going to be how do we go a bit deeper. That is to move people a little bit more depth in who they are and what they're doing and why they're here. We try to really don't rush people. I know a guy that showed up at our church one Sunday. He said that he was at another church the week before. They saw him. He was the youngest guy in the room. They asked him to be the youth leader at that church. He fled because they didn't know anything about him and they were just giving him a job. So it's really trying to honor that the people that come are spiritual people. They want to engage, and our job, I think, is to help them engage in the right way. That's about all I need to say. We must be close to the time. I'm not sure if people have a question. Again, I'm not telling you to do what I did. That's not what I'm saying, or that I'm an expert in any way. I'm just sharing some of my experience of what worked here. I'm trying to figure it out. Lots of days I don't know what I'm doing or how I'm doing it. I've said not long ago, I don't know how I might do my job anymore. And I sit in that as I try to sort through what it means to lead in this place that is quite vibrant and quite exciting and interesting. I just try to do a lot of listening to the people who come and what's drawing them here. If anybody's got any questions, that'd be good.
Well, I'm really excited by your experience at Hillhurst and your sharing last week as well, and I think all of us can bring back some principles and to add to our conversation in our leadership circles and our couple of folks are still typing. We have one question. John, how did the structure help leadership or not?
I'll answer that. If this is David, who I think it is, gosh, I haven't seen your name in a long, long time. But anyway, how do the structures help your leadership? The local church structures help my leadership. That is, the wider church, they don't. The wider church structures, to be honest, they don't. So I don't, I don't look to the wider church to guide me or lead me in this particular thing. And in some ways, you're a pioneer out there. You gotta do it. That's not the church's fault, perhaps. It's just that my experience was that learning the leadership happened somewhere else. We try to we follow the rules and stay connected to the wider church, but that hasn't helped. The structures don't help it. So as an example, on staff, we have people, we didn't ever say to Presbytery, hey, do you think we should get a communications person? We just knew we needed it, went and got it. I don't know if Presbytery knows or not, but that's what's happening. You have to figure out what you need and want and go get it. We have not done a JNAC in my 6.5 years here. We just did a survey as a congregation. We sent it out by website. We have over 400 responses from people who come to our church. I haven't even seen the ends of it all, but I just know that we're getting feedback about how we're doing, where we want to go, what people think, what they experience, and it's very important to be in that kind of conversation with them. But I have not had help, in quotation marks, from Presbytery or conference. That's not a complaint, just observation. I would also welcome any of you to send me questions that you might have about a particular place where you are. Every community is unique. You should do it your way. That is, in the context of where you are. Some things are transferable, some things aren't. I often think it's easier. I got lucky. I came to a small place. You can grow it. I think it's harder to have 100 people and move forward than it is to have 38. 38, they'll go with you. 100 tend to look backward and say, we always do it this way.